Cambodia went from enduring one of the worst atrocities in all of human history up to being a stable, modern, $46 billion economy as of 2024. But to fully respect that progress, you have to understand how bad things were when they first got started. Back in 1975, when Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge took over the country, they had a deliberate policy of killing everyone that was educated, emptying out the cities, forcing everybody into farm work, abolishing money, and basically trying to take their entire society back several hundred years under their supposed perfect society. After the Khmer Rouge came out of power in the 1980s, Cambodia emerged as one of the absolute poorest countries in the world. It had less than 15% electricity access. There were no high-rises anywhere in the country. And they were basically seen as a dependent country that could only really survive if they were getting foreign aid. It was a disaster. A lot of people's stereotypes of Cambodia still painted by the 80s and 90s when they thought all it was cheap beer and a couple of cheap thrills and overall crushing poverty. However, I'm back here after 9 years and I've already seen amazing development. So if you want a first-class standard of living with a third world price tag, then you definitely want to watch this video. So back in 1975, when Pol Pot became the communist dictator of Cambodia, he uses Khmer Rouge to start massive executions of anybody who was considered educated. So doctors, lawyers, librarians, scientists, everybody that wore glasses, spoke French, had any sign of anything above a basic working or peasant's level education, he decided to execute. Everybody else, there were workers that were in the city, he had his army go in and empty out the cities, push everyone out to the countryside. Everyone in Pol Pot's perfect society was going to become a farmer. He abolished all modern forms of currency, and he basically took Cambodia back to a medieval standard of living when it wasn't that advanced to begin with. And so in the process of doing that, the population of Cambodia at the time was 6 million people. He reduced it by 2 million. It was, by percentage, it was the worst mass human deletion event in all of human history. And all of it took place right here. And that had lasting consequences throughout their society, that once Pol Pot and communism failed, as it always does, emerging in the 1980s and 90s, Cambodia was largely aid dependent. Of course, they had lost all of their educated people, all of their different managers, everybody that were the core component of the people that you would need to build an economy back up. And so they started out in a very, very bad position. It's difficult for us to even imagine. You know, you think of other countries that got set back to zero. You think of somewhere like South Korea that had, during the 1950s, it had a civil war between the South and the North, and obviously America was involved in that too. But at the end of it, the entire country was absolutely destroyed. This was even worse than that because it was completely internal, and it targeted specifically the people that would have had the skills and expertise the most necessary to build a developed, integrated economy that could trade with the rest of the world. However, they slowly worked back, they slowly built their education system up, they slowly built up their tech again, and then starting in the early 2000s up to 2010 was when the big shift took place, which is interesting because that was actually when I came here. I came here in 2016, New Year's, so more or less like that mid 2010s period when they actually were undergoing the very beginning of their development push. I didn't think anything of it. When I came here, this was very, very visibly a poor country, and I had been living in South Korea at the time, and so when I was here, I basically envisioned like, oh, this is what Korea probably looked like when it was really poor back in, say, the 70s, except for this was the 2010s, and I was like, well, I guess they missed their mark, and this country just never really sorted it out, and I was pleasantly wrong. So starting in the 2010s, there was actually a big shift. They had already, because they basically, like many other developing countries in Asia that came before them, every country has basically an economic curve where they start out in sort of low skill fields and take the fact that because they are so underdeveloped, they have very cheap labor expenses, and so they can manufacture products at low prices because they don't have to pay their workers as much because the cost of living is generally lower. And then as they're doing that, And it's the same thing that all these other Asian tigers did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so Cambodia was just, dealing with its own issues at the time, as I had just mentioned. Basically, they were able to arbitrage that. They were able to get into the textiles. And so a lot of, normal brands that a lot of us know, some other like sportswear products and stuff like that, started being made in Cambodia. And that started laying the groundwork for them being able to integrate their economy, improve exports, and start increasing their standard of living. And then one of the other things that they did that was also very intelligent was they pegged their currency, the Cambodian riel, to the US dollar. And even though the US dollar had its own issues with inflation, because they pegged their money directly to the US dollar, even though the US dollar does commonly get inflated, it's also still the reserve currency, so it can't really be abused. So in a sense, it actually stabilizes their economy, which they obviously needed when they were an extremely poor country, that they needed to have a stable currency. But back even up into the 2000s, there were no buildings that were higher than 16 floors. Like if you went to Phnom Penh, it was all very largely flat. And it's like if you walk around here now, you see 50, 60 like skyscrapers up in the Phnom Penh skyline. This was still a majority cash-based society. They started introducing online banking apps and other forms of basically like this little QR system that you can use to scan it and do like a direct bank transfer that you can use for smaller currencies. You can basically use everywhere in place of cash. I haven't really set that up because that's normally like a bunch of extra steps and you gotta go through like whatever their native system is, and I just keep cash on me. So one of the things that you see in a lot of countries, a lot of developing countries, is they go through these very rapid development periods where they go from like a mostly agrarian society. They grow up as children in the country and then they go off to university and then they go into the cities, and they ended up having this very large working class that's in their 20s and 30s. And that's really when you see like the biggest boom in an economy. And it's when you see the highest standard of living for the lowest price. And so as you see the working population start aging out and the demographics tree get a lot more narrow versus having like a nice bulge in that middle working class area, you have less people putting into the system and more people taking out of the system. And then that's when you start seeing a lot of production going down, but also prices are going up. So you're seeing demand go up, but you're seeing supply go down. And so that's a lot of times what ends up happening as far as having the most expensive, like that's when you start seeing standard of living actually going down. And we're seeing that in a lot of different parts of Asia. And a lot of it is, they say demography is destiny. So just like it really is the best time to be in a country when you have that sort of, the bulk of the population in that working age group and you have the fewest people sort of pulling out of the system, which right now, the two places that have that in Southeast Asia are Indonesia and Cambodia. Right now, the majority of their working population is in that vital 20s through 30s cohort. Modern society where things are actually like relatively inexpensive. I got to experience that in Korea back in the 2010s, and it was absolutely awesome. And now as the population is aging out in Korea, I still love it. I still have a lot of attachment to the place, but let's be honest, you're not getting the lifestyle for the same price you used to. So for that reason, if you're looking for somewhere in Southeast Asia to spend some time, I would definitely say, because right now Cambodia is in sort of the golden part of its demographic curve, and you have a very high standard of living while keeping prices relatively stable, this is probably somewhere you're going to want to spend some time. If that's something that you liked, I'm doing a whole series on neighborhoods, apartments, gym recommendations, co-working spaces, so that you as a digital nomad know all the things that you're going to want to know prior to getting here. So if you want to see my best neighborhoods in Phnom Penh video, then go ahead and click right there.